Some men are so repulsive to women just by nature of their existence that it should be legally recognized as a disability. It's very difficult for even average guys to find any success in the modern dating landscape. And that is largely due to social media in combination with the highly gynocentric state of society resulting from the unrelenting success of the feminist revolution. In other words, we're living in unprecedented times. A lot of the men struggling to find love these days would have fared much better 30 to 40 years ago. But some men have even bigger problems. Some men would have struggled no matter what time they were born in, no matter what society they were born in. Some men actually have no chance whatsoever at ever being loved by a woman. That's a fact. But even these men get nothing but platitudes when they try to vent. Or they try to get some help and people want to gaslight them into thinking it's something they're doing that's the problem. These men get misled time and time again. They are given false hope. And really what they need is some form of government assistance. Some men are so repulsive to women just by nature of their existence that it should be legally recognized as a disability. And no, I'm not being hyperbolic. I'm being 100% serious. And actually, there is some legal precedence for this idea in at least one European country. More on that later. But what exactly am I talking about here? What is it that makes certain men literally incapable of being loved by a woman in a romantic way? Well, just open your eyes. It's looks. It's genetics. There might be some subjectivity to physical attraction, but it's not as much as most people think. And it's certainly not true that there's somebody out there for everyone. Even before social media and online dating and all the modern implements of our society that make the dating market so incredibly difficult to navigate these days, there's always been some people that are just so unattractive, it is literally not possible for another human being to be attracted to them. And let's not fool ourselves. Physical attraction absolutely is a necessary component of romantic love. If you can't admit that, then just click off the video now. You could probably find something more your speed on Disney+. Now, let me dispel some common arguments that people like to make. One belief I think a lot of people have is that they'll accept that, yes, some men are objectively ugly, but they'll say, that's okay, because there are some equally unattractive women out there that would be attracted to them. The problem with this line of thinking is that, first of all, the dating market is not exactly equally fair for both sexes. Unattractive women tend to have a lot more options than unattractive men. It's simply just a function of the fact that men are expected to be the initiators of all romantic interactions, while women do not have that expectation. Men pursue, women choose. That is and always has been the trade-off across virtually every society in every era. So naturally, women at every level of looks will tend to have more options than their equally attractive male counterparts because the men come to them. Generally, a very unattractive man is going to be reluctant to approach most women because he's probably already experienced plenty of rejection throughout his life. So even if there were some women that would have been interested, he's usually going to miss out on most of those chances. Okay, so that's one thing. Very unattractive women tend to have more options than equally unattractive men, so that means they're usually not going to be very receptive of an equally unattractive man's advances. And those advances are unlikely to come either way because most unattractive men are just very unmotivated due to their life experiences. Also, most people are only attracted to attractive people It's like this for men and women. If you were uglier, do you think you would suddenly be more attracted to uglier people? That's not how it works. People are not primarily attracted to equally attractive members of the opposite sex. People are just attracted to attractive people. So if a man is extremely unattractive, that doesn't mean that equally unattractive women will find him attractive. They won't. Also, the ugly man isn't going to find ugly women attractive either. So at best, what you're doing is you're telling cripplingly unattractive men that, well, tough shit, partner. You have to settle for a woman that you find repulsive, while everyone else gets to have romance with people they're actually attracted to. So if that's what you believe, then okay, think what you want. Doesn't seem very fair to me. And I hope you're consistent with that viewpoint. I'm assuming that means you also believe that a physically disabled man should be forced to either go with no income at all, or he should at best get maybe $5 an hour or some pitiful wage like that. After all, that is what would be consistent with what you think an ugly man should have to deal with romantically. And fair enough if that's what you think, but something tells me most of these limousine socialists out here would have big problems with what I just said. But it's a moot point anyways, because it's not true that less attractive people have a lower threshold for who they find attractive. Beautiful women and ugly women are attracted to the same exact men. And if you think, well, okay, some people just have to settle for each other then sure, I think that would probably be the simplest and most fair solution. Ugly men and ugly women could settle for each other, and sure, there won't be any true love between them, but they could still work together to pull resources together and look after each other. And I don't know, maybe they could develop a type of love for each other over time. So that could work. And I think most unattractive men would be okay with that. The problem is, I'm pretty sure very few unattractive women would be willing to settle for their looks match. The dating market is very lopsided in women's favor, and women also earn more money than men these days. Or that's true about younger men and women, and that's not going to reverse as the younger generation ages. Young women are vastly overrepresented in nearly every high-earning profession compared to young men. You can look at data for school enrollments at medical schools, law schools, dental schools, veterinary school, and the list goes on. From now and on into the foreseeable future, ugly women have much higher earning potential than ugly men, which makes them much less willing to settle. They're also less willing to settle for a partner they aren't attracted to because women do not crave sex to the same degree men do. They tend to be okay going without if they can't attract a man they deem suitable. By the way, everything I'm saying should be obvious just by the fact that so many more men are single these days compared to women. 63% of young men are single compared to only 34% of young women. That's data from 2022. If I recall correctly, that was for men and women aged 18 to 29. And I'd be willing to bet the gap has only gotten wider since then. And there's been multiple studies performed by analyzing data from dating apps that all come to the same conclusion that most women do not find most men attractive. It should be easy to understand that most women only find the same few men at the top attractive. That is abundantly clear, even without looking at any data. But if you need science to convince you, then the data is out there. Okay, and here's another point. Even if less attractive women were attracted to similarly attractive men, the fact of the matter is that because women have more options than men, as we've already discussed, those women are not going to settle for the lowest rung of man they find attractive because more attractive men than that will be in their DMs. Even if a woman does find Jonah Hill attractive, that doesn't mean she'd find Jonah Hill more attractive or even equally attractive as Channing Tatum. Just using that as an example, I don't think Jonah Hill is as unattractive as the men this video is about, but I wanted to use someone well known for the example. Very unattractive women still have average to above average looking men trying to get with them, at least from time to time. So unattractive women just do not see themselves as being on the same level with equally unattractive men. So it's just a bad situation for ugly men. Okay, so let's move on to talking about solutions. As it is currently in most of the world, especially throughout the developed world, society just says tough luck to cripplingly unattractive men. They get no assistance. They don't even get any sympathy from most people. At best, they might be able to get state-sponsored therapy in some places, but that's never even directly because of the root cause of their issues. The therapy is only prescribed if they have certain mental health issues resulting from their loneliness. And they might also get the state to pay for some medication in some cases, but again, that's not treating the root cause. The actual issue is that they are extremely unattractive. Antidepressants are not going to change your bone structure, okay? This is not medical advice, but I'm pretty sure taking Zoloft is not going to give you a more defined jawline. So I would call that a Band-Aid, not a solution. Truly, I don't think there is any actual solution, but I think there are some things we could do as a society to help these men a whole lot better than we are now. Okay, first off, let's talk about arranged marriage, specifically in the context of government-enforced arranged marriage. To my knowledge, there is nowhere in the world currently that has such a policy. I think in places where they do have arranged marriage, it's always just a cultural practice, as in the bride and groom's family are the ones that decide who marries who. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I don't support arranged marriage, by the way. There are pros and cons, of course, and maybe it's just my American upbringing, but I just don't think it's right to force anyone to be married to someone they don't agree to be married to. And I think there are better solutions. But the benefit to arranged marriages would be that ugly men would be able to start a family, and they would have a wife. Their wife wouldn't actually love them, though, and she very well might even resent her arranged husband. Then there's the matter of, well, what if the wife refuses to be intimate with her husband? Do you make that something that's legally required as part of the marriage? I think in most people's conception of a government-enforced marriage, that would be the case, but I don't think that's a great solution. Now, I will say, in general, not talking about that specific issue anymore, but in general, I think most women would happily go along with whatever the policy is at the time, assuming mainstream media supported it as well. But that's not going to happen. Aside from the obvious moral issues, society is just too far gone in the gynocentric direction at this point. I think it's just ridiculous to consider arranged marriages as an actual solution. It's just a thought experiment. It would not actually work, and it's obviously never going to happen anyways. For a solution that doesn't limit anybody's freedom, where nobody's forced to do anything they don't want to do, we can look at a policy that was in place in the Netherlands from 1992 until 2017. It's kind of hard to find any reliable information about what exactly the policy was. I think maybe it was only in certain municipalities, but there's a lot of contradicting information about this online. But there was some sort of policy where, to the best of my understanding, disabled men could apply to receive a grant that they could then use to help pay the cost of seeing a professional working woman who would help satisfy their physical needs for intimacy. Some sources say they were limited to one government-subsidized session per month. Other sources say all this was that disabled people were given a cash benefit each month, and then they could use that however they wanted, meaning they could use that money to see a physical therapist if that's what they wanted to do, since that type of service is legal in the Netherlands. So it's a bit unclear what the exact policy was. I don't know how the hell it is so hard to find information on something that was supposedly a government policy. I think maybe there's just a lot of misinformation flooding the web about this topic, so it's just hard to sift through it all. Maybe some of my Dutch viewers might have more information, but either way, the basic idea is that the government would subsidize the cost of paying for sex for disabled men. Now, in the Netherlands, this was only for disabled men. I don't think they included being ugly as a disability. Otherwise, they'd have to be giving money to every single person living in the entire country. Just joking. That's a joke. But yeah, I think something like this would be a lot better than the nothing we're doing now. I think, of course, the subsidies would have to be available to any man that is sufficiently unattractive, not just for men that are physically disabled. And obviously, there's the issue of how do you decide who's ugly enough to get the benefits? Because no matter how you look at it, there is some subjectivity to attractiveness. You could measure facial features and ratios and all that, but I don't think that's perfect. There's still going to be some outliers, some people with normal enough measurements that are still very unattractive, or vice versa. But I think we could figure something out if we thought about it hard enough. Or maybe just offer the subsidies to every unmarried man in the country. I don't know. Maybe that would be too expensive, or maybe not. The popular red pill figure Roosh V proposed a solution called the Complementary Heterosexual Affections Directive, or CHAD for short, which was similar to the Netherlands model. There were some interesting details about how it could work using state-issued QR codes to prevent any normal men from impersonating a man that actually had permission to use the subsidies. And he proposed a system where the working women could be rated by the men using their services, and anytime one of the women dropped below a certain rating, they would immediately be fired from the program. But the part I think is most interesting about Roosh's idea is the way the program would be funded. So the idea was that the program would be paid for through special taxes on birth control, dating apps, and smartphones. Now, Roosh's idea was to require the taxes on smartphones and dating apps only for women, so men would never have to pay the tax. In my opinion, it seems more fair that married men should also have to pay the smartphone tax, if that was a thing. By the way, the reason the special tax would be included on the purchase of smartphones is because smartphones are one of the biggest facilitators of the very lopsided dating economy we're experiencing in the modern world, which is true for sure. Maybe it makes more sense to impose the tax on the tech companies that create the smartphones and the dating apps rather than taxing the consumers. I don't know, you could argue that the cost would get passed on to the consumer either way. I really don't know. I'm not very knowledgeable on economics. But I do think Roosh was onto something with the idea of having some kind of tax on certain products, especially with birth control. I think that makes a lot of sense. So I think some form of government-provided subsidies to help ugly men pay for physical intimacy services would be a good idea. Obviously, it wouldn't solve the bigger issue of these men not being able to find love. I do think the emotional aspect has a bigger impact on a man's well-being than the physical aspect, but that's a lot more difficult to solve. I think some kind of program like this would at least be a step in the right direction, and nobody's being forced to do anything they don't want to do, so, I think it's a solution that is morally sound in every way. One possible downside is that you'd be essentially legalizing prostitution, Even if it was only for the men that qualify for the program, you'd still be incentivizing some women to go into that line of work, which arguably is not good for society. So that is something to consider. Another similar idea is instead of the government paying for those kind of services, the government could subsidize the costs of certain cosmetic procedures for ugly men. Think like hair transplants for bald men, or leg lengthening surgery for short men, or I don't know, actually, I'm not very well versed on what all kinds of cosmetic procedures are out there, but overall, I don't really like this idea. The biggest problem, I think for most men that are unattractive to the point that they would qualify for a support system like this, there's no amount of cosmetic surgery that would make a difference. I think the hard maxing route usually only works for certain men that are on the border between ugly and not too ugly. Or even if it works for a lot of guys, you have to admit there's definitely some men that are just too ugly for it to work. Also, there's a lot of risks involved with some of these procedures. I just don't think it's realistic. I don't think it would be effective. In cases where it does work out, it would be better than just subsidies for sex, because this would theoretically actually make a man more attractive, so he could potentially actually find love. So in cases like that, it would be solving both the physical and emotional aspects of the problem, but I don't think it would actually work for most of the men that need help. And I also think it would be a lot more complicated to decide who needs what specific procedures versus just deciding whether or not a man is ugly enough to be awarded a subsidy for physical intimacy services. Ultimately, there is no perfect solution, and I don't think there ever could be. But the idea of government subsidized services paid for by special taxes, I think that could be better than nothing. Obviously, something like that will never happen in the United States. I'm surprised the Netherlands even used to have some kind of system in place, although that was specifically for disabled men. So that's not exactly the same as what I'm talking about here. But if nothing else, I hope someday we can get to a point where more people recognize the lack of physical attractiveness in a man as an actual disability in and of itself. Because it is. It has a huge negative impact on a man's life. But currently, in our society, ugly men just get laughed at. Very few people have sympathy for these men, and that is a big problem. I hope maybe I was able to change somebody's mind with this video. I doubt it. I'm probably just preaching to the choir here. But think about it. A man that is very, very physically unattractive, and I'm not talking about a man that's like obese or he doesn't take care of his appearance, so that's why he's very unattractive. I'm talking about certain men that are just extremely unattractive. Just, that's the way they were born, just because of the shape of their nose, certain ratios of their facial features and all that. They're so unattractive just because of their genetics that they have no chance of finding love. That is a disability because of how extremely negative that affects a man's life. So we need to recognize that as a society, and we need to work on trying to find a solution. Or we just keep telling these men, ha, too bad, But I think as a developed society, that's not how we should be treating people that are just unlucky due to the nature of their birth. I think we should be trying to help raise people up. I think at the very least, we should recognize a disability for what it is, and we should, at the very least, have sympathy for people suffering from this ailment. But if you liked the video, or if anything I said made you think about things, please check out some of my other videos. There's also some secret videos you can watch for free on my Patreon, so check that out. No sign up required. You can just watch the videos. But thank you for watching this one, and I'll see you in the next one.